Hey guys, so today bringing you another video. Now welcome to another little Riot dev update or quick gameplay thoughts is what they call it. So I like to do these because it kind of keeps us all up to date on what Riot is thinking, and I would say especially nowadays with, League's in a bit of an interesting area for a lot of people. I think it's good to know what Riot's thinking about change and, the general game health. And this one is by Riot Scruffy, who is currently the head. I think his official title, if we scroll the whole way down, here we go. So this is Mark Yetter. So this is the guy that's actually leaving to go for the MMO team, and we'll be getting a new lead gameplay designer. So that's the actual title. So it's the lead on Summoner's Rift, Champions, competitive teams, the guy. So he's writing this himself. So it would be quite interesting to know what he is thinking about specifically Champion Counterplay, because that has been a conversation recently in this season. The Counterplay has become much less of a thing because of how much damage is in the game. I and many people have been calling League of one-shots nowadays, and when the damage in the game goes up, the skill in the game goes down. Also, the counterplay goes down. So, because if you get just one shot, and when I say one shot, I'm not just saying one ability is literally one-shotting you. We're talking, okay, one champion using QWE and maybe ultimate, you just get one shot, even at level 7 in the game nowadays. That's a bit crazy. That's still kind of a one shot. If there's nothing you can do, just one champion combo, you're dead. Like an Annie. An Annie can do one combo at level 6 and most mid laners will die. It's a bit early to do that much damage. So we'll see what this says and we'll give our own opinions. And obviously you guys in the comment section can give yours as well. So here we go. This week's focus is on counterplay, one of the principles of champion gameplay design, rather than upcoming work or the state of the current game. There's not a lot of new here for long-term readers, but it's been a while since we touched on the topic. So they're basically just probably giving the thoughts about what they're thinking about this, which is fine. I as I said earlier, I like to know what Riot is also thinking, because then you can kind of anticipate change or kind of put your expectations on the game to where Riot is also thinking, and sometimes that can help you if you're frustrated with the game or anything. You're like, okay, this is what Riot's going for. Okay, I'll adapt. So, champion counterplay. Counterplay, one of our key values, could be defined as action, choice, or strategy a player can use to mitigate or overcome an enemy threat. This has been a staple of our design philosophy for many years and improved League time and time again when we apply it well. The two main benefits of game design principle are fairness. Having an understandable, clear, and useful response significantly reduces the frustration of losing a game or death, even if a player or team can't perfectly execute on it at their current skill level. So you may know, oh, if I do this, I can kind of counterplay. But maybe, yeah, even if you just feel like your skill level isn't quite there, at least you knew what you had to do. So the frustration goes down. You're just like, I couldn't pull it off mechanically. It helps players grow by pointing them toward actions they could have taken to succeed, rather than just feel like the game cheated them. This is often referred in game design as agency. So this is something that Riot and any game dev is going to have to try and encounter. The lower rating you go, or the newer players you go, very often it'll never be their fault ever. It'll always be, they feel cheated out of the win. It was never like, I could have done that instead. I could have done that instead. Oh, I made that mistake there. It's always something else. So making it more obvious that this is the fair way that you can counterplay something, it makes that point less prevalent of, no, you could have won that if you just did this instead, which is very important. Depth. Champion designs that leave room for an opponent to respond add many additional layers to the depth of the experience. Battles can be back and forth of mechanical and mental skill instead of who shoots first, one and done experience. So that is what I'd say personally for me Riot is mainly failing on right now. Very, very often in a lot of it's not just individual champions in League. A lot of champions in League feel like that. Whichever champion shoots first is going to win the fight because of how much damage in the game, a lot earlier damage in the game. Especially with, the new mythic items. A lot of these items have insane strength to them. So if one champion just gets their mythic a little bit ahead of the other one, you're talking a minute or two. That can make all the difference. So that for me is where I would say Riot is failing, definitely. And even, you know, champion designs that leave room for an opponent to respond. Again, there's the big thing, the meme going around of, especially like the 2020 champions of League or even the 2021 champions. A lot of the champions in the last couple of years, their weaknesses are very small. Their strengths, however, are very tall. You know, they have a lot of strengths. And yeah, and I think, you know, that is kind of natural. The game is 10 plus years old, so the champions are going to get more complicated, and a lot of the mechanics, more basic mechanics, have been done, so they can't do those again. So the only way that you have to design new champions is more complicated and more crazy, and with the player-based skill going up on average over the years, these newer champions are very strong on average, and the only way they can dumb them down or make them not overpowered is just reduce their stats, because their kits are so inherently strong. So that is what I would say right now. The second one definitely is where I'm like, I don't think Riot's hitting that one on the head. But anyway, the ideal champion has clear strengths and weaknesses that offer counterplay and at a strategic level, paired with tactical counterplay in combat response. So strategically, you know how to beat that champion if you do it well, but also you have to mechanically play out that champion too. So that makes sense. Whether that, again, that is what is the ideal. Whether the Riot does that or not is, I guess, a debatable discussion. Counterplay can come in many forms, and every champion needs a slightly different way of delivering the appropriate counterplay to match their unique strengths and weaknesses. So, tactical counterplay. This is in-the-moment opportunities to respond to a spell or champion combo. Notable examples: dodging a skill shot, interrupting a channel, long wind-up for preparing defenses, and positioning behind an ally or minion to block attacks. Makes sense. Tactical counterplay is essential for super high impact moments or combos that will often guarantee, like a Blitzcrank Hook, Ash Arrow, Scion Q, you know, landing that actual skill to make something happen. In most cases, it's best to make sure that tactical gameplay is universally accessible, versus being tied to a specific champion or whatever. So all opponents have the opportunity to respond to this impactful spell. So that's what they're saying, is no matter what spell it is in League, you as a player should be able to do something about it. Like Blitzcrank Hook, well, you can technically dodge it or flash it. That is the tactical counter to spells, is mechanically beating it. Too much can actually be a bad thing. Not every spell needs tactical counterplay, and too much leads to a kit that feels clunky or overly unreliable. Impact and counterplay should often be proportional. Stronger effects benefit from more counterplays. Some spells like Ashar can do both at once, with increasing stun duration as the spell moves further and further, but it gives opponents longer time to dodge it. So with the one thing I would say about this, one of the most notable champions that people don't like when it comes to, let's say, tactical counterplay, Windwall. Yasuo's Windwall. A lot of people would deem that, you know, is one of, if you did like a little poll of like what is the most annoying ability in League, Yasuo's Windwall, or Samira's Windwall, or whatever they call it with her, is probably going to be very high up on that list, because, like Riot says here, there needs to be a balance with it. Too much is actually a bad thing. And many people, and I have seen over the years, have called for Yasuo Windwall should not be just a set duration. You know, he can dodge, or he can block Ornn ultimate. He can block Ashe ultimate. He can block many abilities in League. Maybe it should have a maximum count that, oh, you absorbed an ultimate, the Windwall goes instantly, but you absorbed that ultimate. So that's where some people would like even argue going, it's good to say this, but even Riot and League, they don't kind of match this, because Yasuo Windwall can block, in theory, every single skill shot in a team fight. You know, if the enemy team, and I will say that is obviously tactical counterplay in itself, if you are against a Yasuo and you blow your ultimates when you know he has Windwall up, that's on you, and that's what some people would say. But Windwall is not an ultimate. Windwall is a W spell, right? And that's where some people are like, it's a bit strong for that, so maybe it could be toned down. It's all about like making things feel good, and that's, in the end of the day, what Riot is trying to do. So there's that. Overall, that makes sense. Again, tactical gameplay is what you can do in a game at any given moment, mechanically, using your spells, dodging things, decision-making within the game, based on mechanics. The other way of counterplaying people is strategy. So the type of counterplay is assessed out of combat, and often by the team as a whole. So notable examples of strategic counterplay, and I'd say this is the one maybe is utilized the least in solo queue is strategic counterplay. A lot of people in solo queue are very, very mechanical focused. You'll find even when I've done Smurf series and ranked to diamonds, when I'm even in silver or gold, you can get some pretty talented mechanical players down there. The thing that will let those players down is their strategy. So examples, building or not building counter items. So they could be a mechanically gifted, let's say, Riven main in silver, but they do the same exact build every single game. And that's going to hurt them because they could have a counter item that they could have built in a matchup, and that would have maybe helped them more. So a strategic counterplay is, buying counter items. If you're against an Aatrox, buy a Bramble early, for example, on most top laners. Stuff like that is very important. Invading a weak early jungler. So this is a very big one. If you're against a weak early jungler and you're playing, let's say, Shaco or Lee Sin or something that is known to be pretty damn good in the early game, you see a lot of junglers not invading, not going for any type of aggressive play, and then, lo and behold, the enemy jungler outscales the early game jungler, and you're like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do anymore because you didn't use your window. Grouping against an assassin. So this is one that I've always said, I've always said, oh, they have an assassin, we'll win later, because if we group, there you go. Using blue trinket to avoid an ambush, so that's obviously pretty basic, and pushing into a champion with poor wave clear. So, oh god, they've got all single target damage champions, let's just clump up, absolutely push in, and what can they really do about it? Strategic counterplay can be connected to champion-specific mechanics, like using control wards to counter Evelyn, for example. But it's more often a part of dealing with that champion's broader goals, like split pushing or hyperscaling. So, notably, if you're against an early game champion, try to beat them in the early game. If you're against a late game hyperscaling champion, try to beat them in the early game. If you play passive and you let a Kayle scale, for example, it's kind of on you in that way that, oh, you kind of let that happen. For example, like, again, in top lane, Kayle, and you'll see a video upcoming, Kayle is not as weak as she used to be in the early game. One of two things. One, press the attack rune, and secondly, that's just what League is nowadays. Late game feels like it comes much quicker, so even champions like Kayle, who are really supposed to be weak early, aren't that weak early, especially after they've completed their first item. But it's kind of on not just you, the top laner, to try and beat that Kayle. It's also if you're a jungler and you know, oh, it's a Kayle top lane, strategically, you probably should try and beat that Kayle. Get your top lane ahead of that Kayle in the early game, because strategy-wise, you probably kind of need it. Alright, next up is strategic counterplay can be difficult to understand and appreciate because many forms of it are about setting up the right fight or avoiding it. Again, it's not always a good thing to fight. I've always said, you don't have to blitzcrank your hook at that time. Sometimes you don't have to pull the trigger. Rather than executing it within a fight, adding signals that expose good strategic play can get more players engaged in it. Pings, for example, do as well. Yeah, pings are a type of strategic play, warning your team about a roam. They back off. They don't get killed by a Katarina roam. That's strategic counterplay. That's a very basic version of it, but that is what it is. If you don't ping at all and boom, Katarina double kill, obviously it goes without saying, it's a two-way street. One team needs to, let's say you're mid lane and you can't follow a Katarina roam and you ping. Well, it's also on your team to listen to the pings. It's a two-way street a lot of the time, strategic counterplay. One teammate puts a ward down, which gives you increased vision. If you don't look at the mini-map and actually use that vision, well, then it doesn't matter. So a lot of strategic counterplay is doing something, but also your team responding to it. So that's also worth knowing. Next up is the final way, of counterplay and everything, is the basic one. Champion weaknesses. So champions do have weaknesses, innate weaknesses. There is such a thing, as we all know, called counterpicks. And obviously, I'd say the worst lane, and I think that's just by design, is top lane. Top lane is the counter lane of League of Legends. And I, for one, I blind pick all the time. I don't know why I always get high up in the list. But if I'm top lane and I'm blind picking, I hate it the most. Because top lane is the counter pick lane. It really is. So what are they saying here? This is a set of properties, champion class, or team strategy that tend to succeed against a specific champion. So notable examples, Xerath's immobility makes him weak to mobile assassins. Kiana's burst damage runs out of steam against a tank. Nasus is kited to be honest, by everything, but mobile range champions especially. So yeah, actually using the weaknesses of champions. Like the Kiana stuff, yeah, she can't beat tanks, but even more than that, assassins, it said earlier, group against assassins. That's just a generic kind of weakness for a class, not just a specific champion. Or again, Xerath mobility, well then gank him in the early game, you know, if you're a jungler. Oh, you burn his flash in one gank, oh he's a bit far up again in 3 minutes later, we can kill him. You know, use the knowledge about a champion against them. That's how you counterplay a lot of the time. These weaknesses should lead to a moderate disadvantage, not a complete counter. The variety that comes from playing the game from advantage or disadvantage positions compared to a perfectly level playing field at times helps games from feeling too samey, but if there is no chance of winning against a counter. So I will say, this is something that I think Riot has been maybe working on without fully saying it, in the fact that Riot, Season 3 or 4, which a lot of people will say was the golden age of League of Legends, I feel was when counters actually mattered the most. I don't actually think counters matters as much now as what they did, because Riot's kind of, this is going to sound really bad, but they've dumbed down the game. Items are arguably more important than what champion you're playing nowadays. So counter picks aren't as big of a thing, and I've always said when people come into my Twitch chat and they go, Huz, I'm in bronze, how do I get silver, how do I get gold, give me a champion to play. I never answer that question, because the best answer is that whatever you play best in solo queue is the best champion to play, because it more matters about the player than the champion in solo queue, and especially now that the items arguably are stronger than champions. So again, this is like a small one, and this is where they're saying it's not a huge disadvantage anymore, it's a moderate disadvantage, because champions don't really have weaknesses anymore. And another point to add to that, again, you should be able to counterplay some champion weaknesses. So let's give it a great example. Jinx or Jhin AD carry. They're in a mobile AD carry, right? Nope. Well, they bought Gale Force, so they have mobility now. So you yourself, strategically, counterplay-wise, making yourself better in the game, more useful, recognize your own weakness, and you can kind of counter your own weakness now with items. So Xerath, this example, what do? A mobile assassin. Well, again, you can buy a Zhonya quite early, that will help you, or you could buy, if you're getting CC'd by a jungler, you could buy a Banshees earlier than expected. There are things that you can do to counter your own weaknesses as a champion as well. So, finding the right counterplay for a champion is always a bit different, but a commonly successful approach to the design around their strengths. So, Kayn is meant to transform into a near godlike form in the late game. Yet again, it's not that late anymore. But anyway, this led to both a strategic game, early game weakness, and putting a strong tactical counterplay opportunity in his W that stays relevant even when he's a big late game boy. So again, Kayn is supposed to be weak in the early game before he transforms into red or blue, so you should be able to beat him in the early game. That's not 100% probably necessarily true, because I think some people have seen Kayn is actually not terrible, especially if he can get a little bit of momentum, one early kill or both scuttle crabs, he'll probably be fine. But that's the idea anyway. Again, whether this article is one of two things. This is an idea versus execution. Whether Riot actually has executed this stuff is a different story, but this is the idea. So if Jhin delivers the best class CC and damage at long range, it makes sense to pair that with a clear weakness to a very tanky teams, because he lacks sustained damage to deal with them. His extreme range also led to clear tactical counterplay needs, so the W and R offer opportunities to dodge or mitigate. So yeah, that makes more sense. Jhin is not a tank killing AD carry, and obviously yes, he can technically buy Kraken Slayer, but it's not great synergy with him. But yeah, so the idea is, oh, there's Jhin, he has really high damage, but it's really long range. So tanks are bad for Jhin, because he just doesn't have that relevant oomph to kill a tank a lot of the time, unless he's fed. And secondly, you can dodge a lot of Jhin damage. Oh, his W, you can dodge. His R, you can dodge. Like, you can dodge these things. You know, that is where the tactical counterplay comes in. You're tactically, mechanically dodging his stuff. That's counterplaying. So, yeah. And then I hope these insights were interesting to you all, and you can use your knowledge of these design values to hold us a high standard and help make League better every day. So that's why I've done this video, because again, Riot likes apparently to like collect data. So who knows? There could be very well a Rioter watching this, and that's my point. Is it's good to have these values that Riot try to uphold. I guess in every single design when they're making a new champion, they have to like think about the broad picture. The one, and like again, I have to bring it up because it's just the thing. The one person that I can nearly guarantee that did not use these design values was certainly T. Again, I have no hate for the guy as a person, never met him, but I'm sure he's a lovely person. But he is being quoted as say he only cared about the person practically, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he only cared about the person who played his champion, not the person he played against the champion. That completely goes against this article because it's supposed to be a both two-way street. And that's why a lot of his champions are very, very strong, direct to the point, and not much weakness in a lot of them. If, again, worth knowing, if the player that's playing them is pretty good at them. But that's why a lot of his champions have had difficulty balancing, especially when it comes to counterplay. Even like Thresh and Darius, the more kind of tamer of his champions, have still had a lot of problems, and people kind of forget about that. But yeah, honestly, it's good to know like what Riot's ideas are when it comes to counterplay. Maybe this would help some of you guys understand like what you should actually be doing in a game. Like you shouldn't be just going into a league game going, I'm just playing the game, I'm doing my average lane phase. You need to be thinking about the bigger picture. You don't do the cookie cutter build that you do every single game. You need to think about, is there an item that actually can help me counterplay this person? Is this person early game? I'm more late game. I can outscale, so I won't risk things early. That's also a form of counterplay, is not getting too behind an early game champion when you're a late game champ, because you know you'll outscale, and vice versa. I'm an early game champ, they're a late game champ, I have to be aggressive here. That's all stuff you need to think about, and that's all within this. So it's very interesting to get the thoughts, obviously, of Riot, which is great. But anyway, that is going to be it. If you guys enjoyed this little chat, which I like doing, do throw a like on the video and let me know what you think. Do you think Riot, and this could be the broad question of this video, do you think Riot right now is successful in kind of making champion counterplay good? Like, there's the broad question. Do you think it's good in League right now? Do you think it's poor? Do you think it's good? I personally, if we have a rating system, you can, just comment. 1 being it's terrible, 10 being it's perfect. I would probably give Riot, again, my honest opinion, a 3.5 right now. I think it's below average in terms of like how champion counterplay feels. And that's just a number of things. That's how much damage is in the game. The healing is still a little bit out of control. And I think that, again, items have too much strength. I hate the fact that, like I said earlier, it really feels that it doesn't matter what champion you're playing. It's more about what items you can build. And I really don't like that. Like, I want the fantasy of the video game for me isn't about what items I'm building. It's, I'm playing this amazing arcane mage in mid lane. It doesn't matter. Like, again, any mage is practically fulfilling the same position nowadays. It's, oh, you're a range with a bit of, you're a mage with a bit of range and you can one-shot somebody. That's basically the same now on every single mage in mid. And if you can't fulfill that role, you're not played. Like, that is it. Like, that is how you play. Oh, you're a massive poke mage, and there's no point playing you anymore because you don't one-shot. Or, yeah, you don't out-damage that person's healing. Or you get one-shot by the one-shot champions. There's no point playing you. It's the kind of... It feels like the items have just basically put the game into just, like, these massive peaks of, does your champion do that in mid lane? If not, it's not in this kind of triangle of champions to play. And it's the same in every single role. And I think that's more on items than anything else. But anyway, that's going to be it. If you guys enjoyed this discussion, throw a like on it, throw a comment, let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.